Hi, welcome everybody to the panel discussion about the evolving nature of food hubs as connectors of community. Today, we'll have a brief introduction and then we have three different perspectives that we'll have a brief introduction and then we have three different perspectives that we'll have a brief introduction and then we have three different perspectives. Sorry about that. I apologize. We will have three different perspectives to talk about food hubs and their role as community connectors. Then we will take turns discussing three questions, talking about the future and what we can learn about food hubs. And the last 15 minutes are reserved for us to have a question and answer session with you. So thank you for joining us.
Hi, and welcome to the 17th Annual Food Justice Summit. My name is Enrique Orozco, and I am one of the co-organizers of the summit this year. Before we start your session, I want to highlight some of the accessibility options, engagement features, and explain how to access interpretation services. Hola, y bienvenido a la 17ª Cumbre Anual de la Justicia Alimentaria de Chicago. Me llamo Enrique Orozco y soy uno de los coordinadores de la cumbre este año. Antes de empezar, quiero tomar un momento para indicar las opciones de accesibilidad, las herramientas de participación y los servicios de interpretación. Para acceder a los servicios de interpretación, fíjese al lado derecho de su pantalla. Al hacer clic en la pestaña de interpretación, se abrirá una ventana. Haga clic en Select y luego elija el lenguaje de su preferencia, inglés o español. Seguidamente, haga clic en Connect para comenzar a escuchar al intérprete. Finalmente, debería silenciar el video principal para no escuchar a los presentadores e intérpretes. To access interpretation services, look at the right side of your screen. By clicking on the Interpretation tab, you will open a box, click on Select, and then choose which language you would like to hear, English or Spanish. Then, click on Connect to begin hearing the interpreter. Finally, you will need to mute the main video to not hear the speakers and interpreters. The platform also offers a number of visual accessibility tools. To find them, click on the profile image at the bottom right of the screen, then select Accessibility Adjustments. You can also change the language of your screen. You can select different options to make the website easier to read. We welcome you to participate in the conversation through the chat window. Clicking again on the Chat tab on the right of your screen will open up this window. Select the box at the bottom of the page to begin typing into the chat. At the end of the session, we will open for a brief question and answer portion, and you may type your questions here. Finally, at the end, I invite you to open the polling tab on the right side of your screen to answer this short survey that lets our team know how well we did in planning this session. I hope you enjoy the 17th Annual Chicago Food Justice Summit. I will now turn it over to your speakers.
Welcome, everyone. As mentioned, we will be presenting three different perspectives on food hubs. I, Veronica Posoldan, will be presenting the perspective of research and a general overview of what food hubs are and their many faces. Followed will be Alexandra Pate, who will present the perspective of producer and urban farmer. And last is Haley Johnson, who will be presenting the perspective of connector and as co-founder of the Common Market. The question we have chosen to present our different perspectives is discuss how do food hubs function as connectors of community. In our research done for the Food Hub feasibility study, led by Professor Wesleyan Ashton and with work done by Jay Crosby and Moira Brixby, we have found that the truth is there is no one face and one definition of what a food hub is. We can start with the official definition as presented by the USDA, which can be summarized as in a business or organization that helps local and regional producers meet the needs of local consumers through aggregation, distribution, and marketing. But the truth is there are many organizations who choose not to register themselves as a food hub and do not even accept this classification. What we can say unites all of them is the desire to help small producers break through common barriers in terms of growth and accessing larger markets and institutional consumers, such as addressing issues of volume, barriers to certification, building up access to resources, be they financial or infrastructure related, and last but most importantly is connections. And sharing those and transforming those connections from just transactional to stronger and deeper connections that have a greater impact on the local food system. How they address these barriers is through a variety of services. Some of them focus only on operational services. Some of them also focus on offering support specifically tailored to producers. But a lot of them also provide a lot of community-based services, with education being the most popular. What we can say is that there are two main typologies of food hubs. Larger food hubs focus more on tangible services, such as aggregation and distribution of the product, and often work to serve institutions. Those food hubs that work that are smaller often offer more intangible services such as brokering or education and work directly with the communities around them. Because of this wide variety of services, we can see that there's a range of organizational structures. The most common that comes to mind is the large centralized one, which has a large physical infrastructure that handles all the product. But what we have seen emerging has been one where there is one organization that leads the coordination across a wide variety of services and physical locations, or a more networked approach, which they may not even share the same vision, but sort of figure out where they need coordination, where is it mutually beneficial to pool resources. And this allows for a wide variety of visions of what a food hub is and how it can serve the community. You can have highly specialized ones in terms of what product and services they wish to offer, such as the Milan Food Hub, which focuses on reducing food waste found in restaurants and grocery stores and repurposes it to serve the community. You can have, or on the other hand of the spectrum, which is more networked and a wide variety of services, you can have the South Carolina Food Hub Network, which is individual food hubs with different visions and different communities and different services that they only decide to agree upon what resources and infrastructures and policies they need to work together on in order to create a more vibrant food system. But at the end of the day, what unites a lot of them is how do they combine business models that allow them to create a sustainable profit, but also are able to further their community's vision and needs. The three main models we have found in terms of the business model and the funding is, one is focusing on the return of investment of the infrastructure that they do. So for example, one food hub that we talked to, what they would do is buy real estate and they would form long-term partnerships to meet the to cover the operational costs. And then with that, everything else was profit. So they were able to offer at reduced rates spaces for emerging food entrepreneurs to rent out spaces as they were building up their business. And this helped increase the ecosystem of food entrepreneurs while reducing one of the key barriers of access, which is real estate. Others focus more on value-added services. This is where a lot of them where there is greater margins. And one of the challenges there is the complexity. And the way that they tackle complexity is through specialization. And the specialization can either be focusing on one type of product or area, such as a salad bar, we take control of the salad bar, or focusing on a specific community with needs, such as school children. The last that is used in many models is grants and fundraising, and this is especially important in the beginning. Often what is combined with across all three models are ways of allowing others to be able to subsidize or pay it forward, their costs. So for example, in value added, you may have different price tiers that may allow you to subsidize from one community to the other the purchase of certain resources or sort of products, sort of buy one, give one options. And with that, I will pass it on to Alex, who will present the producer's point of view.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in today. I'm excited to be able to speak with you and share my perspective as a grower. So we can go ahead and get started. My background is in urban food production, and so I want to take a few moments to begin and kind of speak about the work that I've been doing this past year in collaboration with a number of local organizations. So primarily this past year, I worked as the farm manager of City Farm Chicago, which is a 2.5 acre farm located on Division and Larrabee at the previous site of the Cabrini Green housing projects. And so City Farm is one of 3 farm locations that's stewarded by the farming collective Patchwork Farms, and that's who I'm a farmer on their behalf. Patchwork's 3 sites include our flagship location, which is located in Humboldt Park at the corner of Chicago and California, City Farm as well, and then we have a small-scale agroforestry project that's taking place in the back of the yards neighborhood at the plant Chicago. So in partnership with the Chicago Resource Center, who is the organization that leases the land in which City Farm exists, they work in collaboration with Patchwork to farm the land. So we steward that land on the Chicago Resource Center's behalf. Patchwork Farm's mission is to grow nutrient-dense fruits and vegetables using regenerative farming practices to grow produce for residents facing food insecurity. And so we have all of our food sold on a sliding scale, which often means free. We donate a lot of our produce as well. And I can actually take this moment to kind of advertise Patchwork's CSA program, which is also a sliding scale CSA that offers all the great produce that we grow, and we're currently accepting applicants for that. So if you're interested in a local CSA and you're in the Humboldt Park, East Garfield Park neighborhood, go ahead and check out patchwork.com. And so as a farming collective, collaboration is fundamental to the continued success of our organization and our efforts to aid the food sovereignty movement. And so in doing this, Patchwork and the Resource Center collaborate with a number of mutual aid organizations like the Love Fridge, like Fight to Feed, and a number of other neighborhood mutual aids. So this is a photo, actually this background is a photo of one of our production areas at City Farm. But in addition to vegetable and fruit production, we have been kind of exploring with the intersectionality of regenerative agriculture along with food, along with art and health and community building generally. So not only because those things are really fun and interesting, but also because as in the case with what Veronica mentioned with a lot of urban farms, Patchwork's margins are extremely thin, and our margins are slim. We don't have much room as it pertains to our margins. And so this kind of scarcity forced us to start creatively exploring opportunities for multiple revenue streams. So as a result, we developed an event space at City Farm that played host to a variety of events, including regular farm-to-table dinners, musical performances, comedy shows, movie screenings, yoga classes. We've even hosted a town hall meeting for the Love Fridge Mutual Aid. We hosted it there and live streamed it. It was a great event. And so in doing this, we look to foster a rich culture of care that is centered around, the subversion of the mainstream food system. And all these events, consistent with what our CSA and produce kind of policy is, they were all free. They were all based on suggested donations because inclusion is at the center of our work. And so we're able to bring people into urban green spaces to immerse them in an urban farm. And this has a lot of value because we allow a space for people to engage with agriculture, but also to think critically and creatively about how they may desire to engage with the food sovereignty movement. And we think creatively about things. We can't think creatively about things that we don't have exposure to. So this we see as being essential in the proliferation of the food sovereignty movement and the number of people and residents who engage with us. So that was one way in which we were able to generate additional revenue and support our operation, and it worked for our specific circumstances. But throughout my experience in farming, financial sustainability is at the center of the conversation around urban farms feasibility. So one specific roadblock, again, as Veronica mentioned, it pertains to economic feasibility of infrastructure projects like a large storage container, processing facilities, or the funds to just start an infrastructure project like that on your own. And so the costs are prohibitively high, and we're also made aware through our interactions with these various nonprofits that food hubs needed on the south side. So I'd like to just finish up kind of wrap up talking about our vision for the development of a new food hub that we're working on. So this food hub in its mission would look to support local ag and food related entrepreneurs and businesses, as well as serve as a food hub in the more traditional sense to help mutual aids store food and distribute food from this location. The Chicago Resource Center recently acquired a 120,000 square foot warehouse facility, which is accompanied by a 6-acre forest in the Burnside neighborhood. It's located at 9300 Drexel. So if any of you are close to there, feel free to check it out at any time. It's there, it's kind of accessible. And so to the left of the slide here, you can see the satellite image of the building. And just briefly kind of to describe, so the green circle around the property, that's the property limits, the 6 acres of the forest you can see on the south side of the building. I have a small circle there of our smallest of the 3 warehouses, which is about a 20,000 square foot facility that we look to develop directly into a storage facility. So what we're currently speaking about is developing a commercial sized walk-in cooling space to be able to store rescued and recovered donated food that can be distributed from that location. And then also be able to develop a commercial kitchen space so that, again, we can assist small agribusinesses, entrepreneurs in the production of and the processing of food, like the value-added products. I'll finish with this is that I am constantly fighting this, urge, this enthusiasm to bring a vision that I have specifically into existence. And I'm lucky to have access to a number of very intelligent and principled individuals who are involved in the food sovereignty movement here in Chicago. And it's abundantly clear that this project can only be successful as a coalition initiative. And so as a result of some conversations that I've been having and moving forward in what kind of model will work for this project, because we can't project what works for a micro business at City Farm onto this 9300. It won't work everywhere. But as a result, we're looking to explore what a land share type agreement might look like, to see that we have this desire to develop a food hub here, but also understanding that there are many other purposes and many other purposes that the neighborhood may benefit more greatly from just a food hub. And so in this vision, we're looking to only occupy about 1/3 of the available space on this property. And over the course of the next few months and years, as this project moves to its final stages of development, we will be reaching out to community members door to door, working with other community stakeholders and organizations to understand how we can best create this space to not only be a food hub in the literal sense, but in a more a broader sense, right? Speaking of the typologies, to benefit the community in a way that's dictated by the community for the community, and that there's true equity there. So with that, I'll finish my section and appreciate you all for taking the time to be here and listening. So back to you, Veronica.
Excellent. I think I'm going to pick up there, and thank you, Alex. I so very much appreciated your presentation, and the photos of the gardens and the farms reminds me of the desire to get back and get my hands back in the soil. It's been a long, cold winter, and there's nothing like putting your hands in the soil to warm you up again in the spring. But again, my name is Hailey Johnston. I want to share a little bit about our journey as a food hub. We've been doing this work for almost 15 years, coming out of community in Philadelphia, actually. So I'm not native to Chicago. I'm not actively working in Chicago now, but eager to share kind of some of what we've learned over the course of 15 years and our approach to collective care from a community and regional perspective. And as an organization, the Common Market, we're a nonprofit wholesale food distributor. Again, a hub in many lexicon that's successful in building sustainable regional food systems. It works to strengthen the health and wealth of all people. And our approach to the collective care is just that. It's bridging communities across urban and rural divides, connecting farmers with better market opportunities and communities with higher quality food that they may not be able to grow at the scale that they need. And we've been working by building relationships between sustainable family farms, regional markets, strengthening our community's health, environment, local economies. And we partner with a variety of organizations and processors and different actors within the supply chain to make these connections, to realize a full value of healthy food, of a healthy food system. And again, we do this by establishing networks of sustainable family farms, all committed to fostering local economies, consumer health, animal welfare, environmental sustainability, and most importantly, equity. We run year-round aggregation, distribution, and marketing services for our grower partners, connecting their wholesome food. And then we also run the last mile direct delivery to urban and rural communities, from school districts to pantries, to grassroots community organizations, and a whole host of partners. But I think as much as anything, it's important to talk about where we began. And we began in the gardens of our own community in North Philadelphia, growing and sharing food with our neighbors. And over time, through doing this work, we realized a few things. And one was that there was demand that was far more than what we could produce in our own gardens in the city. And that also many of our neighbors were suffering. And the quality of food that we were able to access in the neighborhood was insufficient. So we were looking for food sovereignty over the food that came into our own community, and wanted to figure out a way to do that at a different scale. Again, challenges in our neighborhood, challenges that our families were facing, overcoming afflictions of diet-related disease, chronic disease, and again, most of which was consumption-related, food access-related, and also thinking about the anchor institutions that serve our community, the places where many of our neighbors and especially youth are consuming almost as much as half of their calories on a daily basis. So we really thought about how can we bridge the needs of our communities, again, also with rural farmers in the areas where we work, to increase the access of quality, sustainably grown food at scale. And so we began a planning process because what we knew about was, as you can imagine, what we knew about was gardening, was farming. What we didn't know about was infrastructure. But we began a planning process with our community partners that began to identify the infrastructure needs to connect food from growers to the anchor institutions, and understanding the unique requirements those anchor institutions have, being different than household level access, and that we were proposing, exploring the potential to get into moving food across larger distances, and the need to keep that food safe and cold in many instances. And again, working with farmers to create access to markets. And this is one of our farmers at one of our hubs down in Texas. This is Shakira on her land, working to connect her to market opportunities that she otherwise didn't have access to before. And in particular, connecting her product to communities in Black and brown neighborhoods, and creating more of a bridge, more of a connection, and supporting children in some of the neighborhoods and schools where we work in knowing who their farmer was and identifying with a farmer that looked like them. And bringing that food, her food, and the food of other farmers in our networks through our facilities. What we're ultimately able to do is also create pretty decent, meaningful jobs for our neighbors, for folks in our communities, jobs that compensate well, that come with benefits, that I think provide a degree of dignity, and a place in particular over the last 2 years where people were able to play a role, a much larger role in meeting the community food security of their neighbors. And again, working with a wide variety of partners. This is actually Farmer Chippy in the red shirt in the middle. And Farmer Chippy names us as a partner in his food sovereignty efforts in Baltimore. This is similar to, again, my own story. It sounds similar to the work that Alex is doing, where Farmer Chippy and folks in his community are growing a significant amount of food with their neighbors, and also recognize that there's a whole host of things that they can't grow themselves. So they want to be able to dictate what the quality of food that comes into the community and where it comes from. And so, just to recap a variety of the kinds of partners we work with, food service management companies, which often are the ones that manage the kitchens within larger institutional contexts like public schools, hospitals, and healthcare centers. We also partner with a lot of early childhood education centers, church, faith-based partners, and as you can see the list here, a whole host of partners at all different places within a given community. And so finally, I just want to share a little bit of the scope and the impact of our work over the last 14 years. Founded in the Mid-Atlantic here in Philadelphia in 2008. And we have grown in that time to work with over 150 farmers across the Mid-Atlantic region. So it started as this very Philadelphia and actually just neighborhood centric initiative, but grew from there, again, founded by Black and brown people, led by Black and brown people, meeting the needs of Black and brown communities largely, but have grown pretty significantly in this time. The first place we expanded to was the Southeast in Atlanta, where we worked with a good number of growers, Texas, and then Ileana Pania, who's one of our coworkers, is leading outreach and engagement efforts in Chicago and the Great Lakes region right now to understand how we can play a role and partner to food sovereignty for the Chicago region. And so I'll transition just by kicking off this first question, which is how COVID has affected the nature of hubs over the last couple of years.
So I think one of the things that we have found is COVID broke, as tragic as COVID was, a lot of the myths and a lot of the resources that previously were barriers were sort of liberated, and a lot of communities and organizations began to function as food hubs in an effort to deal with all the lack and the breakdown of the larger infrastructure. So many organizations that previously didn't work as food hubs became food hubs. And what is interesting is they've transitioned from meeting urgent needs to thinking about long-term solutions and starting to coordinate resources to build out infrastructure. Heidi, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, the thing that we observed the most since COVID over the last couple of years is one, just like, community resiliency. And it was the way mutual aid organizations, the way community leaders, the way urban agriculture, the way community came together to care for each other, right? And again, this collective care approach, and not differently entirely than before, but with a different degree of urgency, because we were dealing with life and death matters at that time. And the impact for us, we were faced with an immediate need to consider shutting down our operations because many of the schools and hospitals that we were serving closed their doors. And then talking to our farmer partners and them being desperate because not only were the institutions closing, the restaurants were closing, they didn't know how they were going to get food to communities, and looking for opportunities to actually step into our mission at a different scale. And so we went from just kind of normal activity to almost nothing to doing 10 times the level of volume that we had done historically, primarily just meeting the emergency food assistance needs of our community. So we demonstrated the resiliency of community, demonstrated the resiliency of regional agriculture, and the ability to really rise up in the face of the pandemic.
And I think that's a great point to go into our second question, which is how do we ensure centering the communities where the hubs are located? A lot of communities started building out their infrastructure, addressing these needs, showing this resiliency, but also in their quest to expand their mission, they've also had to expand their geographical range. And so one of the things that sort of emerged out of this, I think, is also, what is community? What are the boundaries? Is it just geographical? Is it the shared imagination? And also, how do you deal with differing visions among the community members? And this is a common challenge that we have seen being addressed across a wide range of institutions and organizations. How do we ensure the memberships? And there's a wide range of ways they've addressed it, from getting members of the community to be part of the leadership structure, following principles of transparency and focusing on reducing the burden of information analysis and input, having constant ways of communication. But one of the key things is coordination. That is one of the main things. A lot of organizations are struggling in terms of finding the resources, the time, the ability to coordinate and build out and co-fund these structures. So that's a lot of where organizations are sort of finding bottlenecks, and we're seeing new partnerships emerge to deal with that. Alex, what questions, what doubts and comments do you have about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, from a literal standpoint, addressing that question, it seems kind of straightforward. And I like to think about this in the same way that I think about the question around, like, how do we help people out of poverty? how do we feed people who are hungry, right? We give them food, we give them money. And so I think in centering communities to these food hubs, right, we have these business models that are primarily dictating, you know, the course of some of these food hubs. And that's not centering communities. And I think we have a lot of room to develop what exactly that even looks like, because if it's just canvassing that, like next door neighbor canvassing, then we might lack some of the investment that is real and is needed to do some of these infrastructure projects, right? And so there needs to be this balance that I'm still very much kind of like looking to understand, and looking to others who have a better handle on this to understand exactly what that looks like, because I don't think we have a perfected model of that yet.
And I think that brings us to our last question to discuss, is how do we balance the mission, the social mission, with the enterprise aspect of it?
Yeah, and so I can continue with that a little bit, because I think, you know, we're going to have to start. I'm hesitant to use the term radical, right? But I think in a lot of ways, the ways in which resources have been hoarded, and this idea of, you know, scarcity, and scarcity actually being an illusion in a lot of ways, that it actually comes down to what we're doing and the systems that we have or do not have in place to make use of the food that we have, right? So us throwing away food doesn't make food scarce, right? That makes us irresponsible stewards of that. And so I think centering around a social mission can only be maintained through, again, that coalition mindset. I think when you have multiple parties who are invested in a shared vision of a mission, and that includes, right, an organizational piece, the institutional piece, it includes the community piece, it includes the investment piece. And so it's a very, you know, walking a thin line. It's a very coordinated dance that needs to happen, but I think it's still up in the air in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I'll pick up on that. One of the things Alex shared earlier was you know, observations about the thin margins in this work, and the thin margins are very real. I think at all different with all different approaches to community centered or regional centered aggregation and distribution, or food connection. It is ultimately like an obligation of our work to also be able to pay our bills, to be able to pay our teams well, to be able to compensate our farmers in a way that supports lifting them out of the poverty that they may be experiencing, as well as farm workers, and centering equity in all of our work. The reality is that food that we see on the shelves of our stores, food that we most regularly encounter in our lives, is underpriced because it's not capturing the true impacts on society. So finding the ways to operate this infrastructure, finding the ways to center all of our values, is one of the hardest things that we do as an organization. And it's part of why we're structured as a nonprofit organization, to be honest, because we see the need to always make decisions based on the most vulnerable in our networks, and that's the most vulnerable on the community side, as well as the most vulnerable on the producer side. And if when we stop centering the most vulnerable in our decision making, we end up replicating the food system we're trying to replace. And so I think it's critically important for this piece of this focus, right, to be centered when operating a social enterprise, really, of any kind.
Yes, I think that's a good place for us to kind of stop and continue this question with input from the audience. I think there was a question earlier from Sarah, trying to find it. Please feel free to put it. So Sarah asked, how do we all protect community-led places, food sovereignty, and solidarity from gentrification and white saviorism. I do ask that if you do want somebody specific to answer the questions, if you could please include that in the comment in the chat so we can direct that. Who wants to take this question?
So I can speak just briefly in an aspect that I find very specific to City Farm and Patchwork Farms. And, I think there are a number of different factors at any given time that can kind of impact this question. Specifically within urban farming, a lot of brown and black people see it as being very white. And there are a lot of white people in urban farming. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that. I think that one of the factors that I've seen, in talking with specifically black people who haven't been in farming before that have been said to me is like, why would I work at a farm? Like my ancestors left the South, left plantations to not do that, right? And there's a big difference between what we're doing and plantations, right? But it's this narrative that exists in our culture that kind of dictates our train of thought as it pertains to these sorts of things. I think that black people placing themselves into these areas, into these fields, is a way in which we get black people involved, right? I want to see like that. That's it. Again, how do you feed people? Give them food. How do you get black people? How do you get brown people involved in urban agriculture and ensure, right, that their voices are being heard through representation? Is you getting involved. And so I think that that's one of the biggest pieces. I think a lot of gentrification comes down to aspects that transcend any of our fields. And so I think in some ways, these larger social issues are products of all these various industries that are operating in a way that perpetuates these cycles of gentrification, that perpetuates these cycles of oppressive food systems, housing, medication, like all of these things, right? And so I think fixating on a specific area to remedy that is a way in which that path is built to address some of these larger societal issues that we're seeing.
And just to build on that, I think one of the things that that we kind of touched upon is the nature of partnerships and realizing, and also combining that with going away from the mindset of scarcity and realizing that even though there are areas with food apartheid, it's not like there's not already organizations, individuals who have found ways and who are working in all areas to kind of address these needs. And it's not coming into an area and saying you're going to rescue. It's taking the time to really understand the unique needs and who already is doing something, finding ways to empower them. It's not coming in and say, I will, be the savior. And I think, Haley, I think that's what I really appreciate about how you've built up the common market and the partnerships you seek and how you enter the market. Would you be able to elaborate a bit more on this?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Well, and just also speaking to, part of her question, or part of the question, I think also relates to being deliberate and proactive in protecting land, first and foremost, creating land access and protecting that land long term from development pressures. I know where we've grown up gardening and farming. Anytime your land starts to have success is when ultimately gentrification begins to happen. And it's when that space becomes desirable for folks from outside of your community to come in and they want to take ownership. And so I think that land banking, I think that finding ways to transfer ownership to farmers is incredibly, incredibly important. But our approach to the work that we do has always been centered in trying to identify who's leading work in any given community, in any region, what their needs are, and if there is a way that we can serve as a partner. And if we're welcomed into a region, if we're welcomed into again to play a role, because there's certain things that we figured out how to do. There's certain relationships that we've built food service management companies that allow us access into these cafeterias. We're excited to play a role, right? But for us, this to the slide that I began with, and really thinking about the why any of us are doing this, and the ecosystems of regional food systems that need to be present to be vibrant. It typically takes many different actors, many different organizations, different partners, coalitions. As Alex was stating, Alex was lifting up like the coalition approach to building wealth and to identifying the resources to make this real for the project that he's working on. And that's how we come in. We ask and we listen, and we respect the folks that come before us always.
So we have one question from Stephanie. Is composting a priority in your current or planned food hub operations? And if not, what are the barriers preventing that? So I think that's for you guys.
Yeah, I could speak again. I could speak briefly. Composting has been always at the center of any of our farming operations. Composting is easily one of the most expensive pieces of inventory that we need to purchase every season, right? And so we do a lot of composting that is not on a commercial scale. And unfortunately, the city has placed itself, in the middle of the road as one of the biggest barriers now, specifically to commercial composting. And I know that there are plans with the Green Era campus that are focusing on composting using what are they? Why am I blanking on it? The anaerobic digesters, right? But again, what is an anaerobic digester, right? That's a huge piece of equipment that requires an enormous investment and takes away, in a lot of ways, it takes away composting as a business in the city of Chicago, unless you have one of those digesters, unless you have an indoor facility to house that. And that's for a number of different reasons. But on an individual scale, composting is something we all can do and is something that we all should do for the revitalization and regeneration of our soils anyway. But definitely composting center.
And I'll share quickly. We have a goal of having running our operations at zero waste, so zero food waste. And the first priority for us is getting near 100% of the food out the door to nourish people, right? And so that being the first priority, and really trying to minimize any kind of additional waste that we create. But we have been successful in Georgia in particular for having a composting company co-locate with us. So anytime there is waste, there's actually the opportunity to put that immediately into building healthy soils in the region. So.
Yeah, and also just briefly, because I know they're a sponsor here as well, Urban Canopy has a great composting, right? So everybody, if you're interested, you need to check that out. City Farm, we have bins out in front on Division as well. Feel free to, but there are a lot of organizations. Like, I think if you reach out to people, you'd be surprised how many people are willing to take your organic waste.
Yeah, and I think sort of finding ways of rescue food waste and repurposing is a lot of what, especially the emerging food hubs, are really focusing on. And going beyond just what happens when it reaches the consumer, but thinking beyond that and thinking more about other uses and stuff. So we are at time for 1 minute. Please feel free to reach out to us. Is there any last words, Alex, Haley, that you would like to share?
I just want to thank the conference organizers, giving us an opportunity to share a little bit about our work. And we're always accessible to be a resource to different projects in the city. So Eliana Pinilla is our local staff, and she'd be excited to partner up. And
I'll just reiterate that. I mean, Eliana already has been in touch with me, right? But that's been the thing that I get a lot of, is like all these organizations are so willing to share knowledge and share resources, and that's the beautiful thing about it. So, right, I support that 100%. We're supposed to say also fill out the poll at the end of our session.
Thank you all so much. It has been a privilege to work with the amazing summit organizers and everyone who was part of this. I want to thank my co-panelists for all their amazing and wonderful insight. It's been a privilege. And for the interpreters and for Sydney. So thank you so much. This has been beautiful, and let us continue to build these partnerships to create a better food system and better community care for all of us. Thank you.
Veronica.
Thank you.